The rain hammered against the diner's grimy windows as Marcus Reid sat in a corner booth, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the edge of a chipped coffee mug. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he barely noticed. His attention was locked on the crumpled note lying on the table. Meet me at mile marker 17. Midnight, come alone. The words, scrawled in shaky black ink, stared back at him like a dare. No name, no hint of who'd left it slipped under his apartment door 2 nights ago. He should have burned it and walked away. But Marcus hadn't survived 10 years of investigative journalism by ignoring gut instincts. And this one screamed that he was onto something big. For months, he'd been chasing the ghost of Lena Carver, a whistleblower who'd vanished after leaking documents about Veridian Labs, a pharmaceutical giant with more money than God and a reputation for burying its secrets. Her leaks hinted at something called Erebus, a project so classified even the whistleblower didn't have the full picture. Lena's last known sighting was a gas station off this lonely highway, 50 miles from the city, before she dropped off the map. Marcus had spent weeks tracking down leads, grainy security footage, whispers of unmarked vans, a sheriff's deputy who clammed up when pressed. The note felt like the missing piece, or a noose tightening around his neck. Either way, he was here now, in a rundown diner with flickering lights and a clock ticking down to midnight. The diner's fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, casting a jaundiced glow over the sparse late-night crowd. A trucker in a stained flannel hunched over a plate of fries, muttering to himself. The waitress, a wiry woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Darlene, wiped the counter in slow mechanical strokes, glancing at Marcus every few minutes. He caught her staring once, and she quickly looked away, her lips tightening, paranoia maybe. Or maybe she knew something. He checked his watch, 11:42 p.m., and slid the note into the pocket of his worn leather jacket. Time to go. Outside, the rain soaked through his coat in seconds as he climbed into his beat-up sedan, the engine coughing to life with a reluctant sputter. The highway stretched ahead, a black ribbon flanked by dense woods that swallowed the headlights. He drove in silence, the wipers slapping a steady beat against the windshield, his mind racing. Mile marker 17 loomed up suddenly. A rusted sign caked with grime, barely legible in the downpour. He pulled onto the gravel shoulder, letting the engine idle as he scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. Just rain and shadows and the faint hum of his own nerves. He gripped the steering wheel, debating, turning back, when a shadow flickered, quick, deliberate, near the edge of the woods. His breath hitched. He grabbed his phone from the passenger seat, thumbing the camera on, and stepped out into the storm. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, stinging his eyes, but he barely blinked. The shadow was gone, swallowed by the trees, but something glinted in the wet grass near the marker. He crouched, his boots sinking into the mud, and picked it up. A silver key, small and ornate, its surface etched with intricate swirls. Attached was a tag, a single word scratched into the metal. Erebus. His pulse spiked. Erebus, the same name from Lena's files, buried in encrypted memos about human trials and chemical dispersal. Veridian had denied it existed, called it a conspiracy theory, but here it was, cold and real in his hand. A twig snapped behind him, sharp against the roar of the rain. He spun, heart slamming against his ribs, but the wood stayed still. Too still. Then came the hum, Low at first, building fast. A vehicle approaching. Headlights blazed through the darkness, barreling down the highway straight for him. He dove into the ditch as a black SUV screeched to a halt, gravel spraying. 2 doors flew open, and figures in dark coats spilled out, their faces hidden by hoods. One clutched a radio, its static cutting through the rain, barking words Marcus couldn't make out. He scrambled up, the key clenched in his fist, and bolted into the trees. Branches clawed at his face and snagged his jacket as he crashed through the undergrowth, the sound of pursuit thundering behind him. His lungs burned, his boots slipping on wet roots, but he didn't stop. The key was his lifeline, proof that Lena's story wasn't a delusion, that Veridian was hiding something monstrous. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a jolt of hope. Somehow, a signal out here, but he couldn't risk slowing down to check it. Shouts echoed through the trees, clipped and professional, closing the distance. He pushed harder, breaking into a clearing, and stopped dead. Ahead, half concealed by tangled vines, stood a rusted metal door embedded in a low concrete bunker. It looked abandoned, forgotten, except for the small keyhole glinting in the faint moonlight. His pursuers were seconds away, boots pounding, a flashlight beam slicing through the rain. Marcus fumbled with the key, his wet fingers slipping as he jammed it into the lock. It turned with a heavy click. The door groaned open, revealing a pitch-black stairwell plunging into the ground. He hesitated, glancing back at the silhouettes bursting into the clearing, then threw himself inside, yanking the door shut behind him. The clang of metal echoed in the dark, followed by silence. The air was thick with damp and decay, the cold seeping into his bones. He pressed his back against the door, chest heaving, listening for any sign they'd followed. Nothing yet, just his own ragged breathing and the drip of water somewhere below. His phone buzzed again, and he fished it out, the screen's faint glow illuminating the narrow stairwell. A single new message glowed on the display. "You shouldn't have come, Marcus. They're already inside." His stomach dropped. The light flickered, catching something on the wall. Scratches, deep and frantic, like someone had clawed their way out. Or in. Footsteps sounded faintly below, slow and deliberate, ascending the stairs. The phone's glow trembled in Marcus's hand as he stared at the message. The words seared into his brain, each syllable a warning he couldn't unhear. His breath caught, fogging in the dank air as the footsteps grew louder, slow, deliberate, like a predator pacing its prey. The scratches stretched downward into the darkness. A silent scream etched in concrete. He shoved the phone into his pocket. The screen's light snuffed out and gripped the silver key tighter, its edges biting into his palm. The door behind him rattled, a sharp, metallic thud. His pursuers had reached it. Muffled voices filtered through, clipped and urgent, followed by the scrape of something heavy against the rusted surface. They were trying to get in. Marcus swallowed hard, his options shrinking to one. Down. Whatever was waiting below couldn't be worse than the armed shadows hunting him above. He took a shaky step onto the first stair, the concrete slick beneath his boots, and began his descent. The stairwell spiraled tightly, each turn plunging him deeper into a suffocating blackness. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying a faint metallic tang that coated his tongue. His free hand brushed the wall for balance, fingers tracing the claw marks that followed him down. Some shallow, some deep enough to catch his nails. Who had made them? Lena? Someone else Veridian had silenced? The thought gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. Focus. Survive. The footsteps above joined the ones below now. A dissonant rhythm that boxed him in. His phone buzzed again, but he ignored it. Light would only give him away. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a narrow corridor, its walls lined with rusted pipes that hissed faintly, leaking drips of something dark onto the floor. A single bulb flickered ahead, its weak glow revealing a junction. Two paths branching left and right. Scrawled on the wall in faded marker was an arrow pointing left, beneath it the word exit. To the right, a faint hum pulsed, mechanical and alive. He hesitated, the key heavy in his hand. Erebus. This place had to be tied to it. Some forgotten facility Veridian had buried out here. But who had left the note? Who wanted him to find this? A shout echoed down the stairwell, closer now, and spurred him into motion. He veered left, following the arrow, his boots splashing through shallow puddles that reeked of chemicals. The corridor twisted, narrowing until his shoulders brushed the walls. The bulb's light fading behind him. The footsteps above grew frantic, boots pounding metal, while the ones below, he couldn't tell anymore. They seemed to multiply, overlapping, coming from everywhere. His chest tightened, panic clawing at his resolve. He was trapped in a maze, and someone, or something, was playing with him. The passage ended abruptly at another door, this one steel and unmarked, with a small keypad glowing faintly beside it. No keyhole. Marcus cursed under his breath. The key useless here. He punched in a random code, 0000, hoping for a miracle. The pad beeped red, unyielding. The footsteps were closing in now, a cacophony of pursuit, and he spun around, searching for anything, a weapon, a clue. His eyes caught on a small grate near the floor, barely visible in the gloom. He dropped to his knees, prying at it with shaking hands. It popped loose, revealing a crawl space just wide enough for him to squeeze through. He shoved the key into his pocket and slid inside, the tight walls pressing against his ribs. The air was rancid, thick with mold and rust, but he dragged himself forward, elbows scraping the metal. Behind him, the door rattled. Someone had reached it. A voice barked, cold and authoritative. "He's here! Flush him out." Marcus froze, his heart slamming against his sternum. Flush him out? How did they know? The crawl space sloped downward, and he pushed on, desperation fueling him, until it spat him out into a larger chamber. He stumbled to his feet, gasping, and took in the scene. The room was cavernous, lit by stuttering fluorescent tubes that hung from a cracked ceiling. Rows of steel tables lined the space, each covered with stained sheets, some bulging with shapes that looked too human. Glass vials and syringes glinted on a nearby cart, their contents a sickly yellow. The hum he'd heard earlier was louder here, emanating from a massive machine in the corner. A tangle of tubes and wires feeding into a sealed chamber, its window fogged with condensation. This was it. Erebus, a lab hidden beneath the earth, alive and operational. His phone buzzed again, insistent, and he yanked it out. Another message. "Look behind you." Dread coiled in his gut as he turned, slowly, the air thickening with every inch. A figure stood in the shadows at the far end of the room, tall, motionless, cloaked in darkness. The lights flickered, and it stepped forward, revealing a face he knew but couldn't place. Pale and hollow-eyed, holding a syringe that dripped onto the floor. Above, the steel door groaned open, boots thundering down the corridor. The figure smiled, a thin, jagged line, and whispered, "You're late, Marcus." Before he could react, the machine roared to life, the chamber's window clearing to reveal a body inside. Lena Carver, strapped down, her eyes wide open and staring straight at him. Alive.